We have so many stories in our lives, but our stories are not always heard. On the Hear My True Story podcast, we tell our own true stories.
Before the white car parked, our head teacher had scattered. Looking at him, I could only see his tie that was flying backwards, waving at us, and he disappeared in thin air.
I want to share my life story. I want to share my voice with the people because I know that just a small joke I can tell through this podcast, it will make someone smile.
When you ask me what I fear most in life, I would definitely respond to you and say it's fear itself.
We are fighting for togetherness. We are fighting for equal rights. We are fighting to end injustice.
You don't have to be a storyteller or writer because, guess what? Life writes the best stories.
Hear my true story.
We know very well that in Uganda, it's not only the Anti-Homosexuality Act that criminalizes the LGBT community. LGBTQ persons in Uganda face several legal challenges, discrimination, state persecution, and stigmatization.
This is your favorite time of the week with your number one podcast.
Hear my true story.
Our dear listeners, welcome to Hear My True Story podcast. It is me, your host, Otako, and I'm really, really happy to have you on this wonderful podcast. For those who are listening for the first time, this is Hear My True Story podcast, and it is me, your host, Otako. And for those who have been listening to this wonderful podcast from the start, from the beginning when we established the podcast, we are really, really happy to say thank you. Thank you for always following us and listening to this podcast on your favorite podcasting streaming platform. Anyways, what is so special about this week is that we are not going to have a conversation as usual. We are going to have a lecture. And this lecture is going to be done by Jay Mulucha. We did an episode where we invited Jay and he talked about how it is for any person who is LGBTIQ person in Uganda and how their life is going on right now and what is happening to them after the government of Uganda passed an anti-homosexuality act. Anyway, today it's going to be quite different. Jay was invited by the Queer Center of Marburg to give a lecture about Uganda's newest anti-LGBTIQ law and the impact on its residents. So, my dear listeners, for those who didn't have a chance or an opportunity to know about this lecture, well, this is the right episode. You don't need to miss it out. And of course, I know there's someone who follows this podcast and he thinks like, okay, well, Otako, why are you sharing a lecture on a podcast? Anyway, let me be it clear. Let me make it clear. In Uganda, after the Anti-Homosexuality Act was passed, a lot of voices from the people of the LGBTIQ community were suppressed because there's no media telling their story from Uganda. That means that it's really hard to know exactly what's happening right now to the community of the LGBTIQ persons in Uganda. And it's one of the reasons why I approached Jan and said, well, I have a podcast and I feel happy to have the stories, to have your lecture shared on the podcast because it's not always possible to have their stories told on media. If it's not any international media platform, then they cannot share their own stories. Their voices cannot be heard. For my dear listeners, I use my podcast to share voices of the voiceless, the voices of the LGBTIQ plus people in Uganda are being suppressed. and the podcast, Hear My True Story, we do what we can to have their voices shared. And that's one of the reasons why I have today this lecture being streamed on the podcast.
This week's special guest on your favorite podcast.
Hear My True Story.
Just to let you know, in the beginning, I would ask you to mute yourself during the lecture so that we can all listen carefully. And in the end, there will be time for questions. So then you can ask everything afterwards that you want to know. I'm really happy we made this happen today because it took quite a while for the arrangement of this lecture. So I want to welcome Jay Mulucha, who is our referent for today. I am Rebecca. I'm working at the Queer Center of Marburg, and we arranged this lecture together with some other actors. The original idea came across actually in May of this year after the new law against homosexuality was passed in Uganda. So Jay and I, we got in contact and we were talking about that it would be great to have a lecture, an online lecture, so that many people can get an insight on this important topic. So we managed it. This event is a part of the Queer Introductory Weeks of the University of Marburg. So we've been also supported in this lecture by the local Amnesty Marburg group, which is, I don't know if they are here today. And we've also been supported by Marielle Reis, who is working at the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies in Marburg, and who's also the spokesman of the German Amnesty International group, which is working on Kenya, Tanzania, and Somalia. But she's also working at the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies on the rights and norms discourses on LGBTIQ in Eastern and Southern Africa. So thank you also for being here today. There are actually more people than you can see in the list because at the Queer Center, there's a live screening. I don't know how many people there are right now, but yeah, there should be a few more. So what are we talking about today? I don't want to say so much. The title of this lecture is The Impact of AHA and the Other Criminal Punitive Laws in Uganda and Community-Led Efforts So Far. And Jay Mulucha will introduce himself right away. Oh, okay, you are 15 people. That's great to hear. Jay is calling directly from Uganda, so we will get really close insights on this topic. And before you can start, I just shortly want to say that the topic is fitting quite good to this date, because today we have the International and European Day Against the Death Penalty. And as in Uganda, death penalty is still a real threat, especially for queer people, and especially after the law was passed now in May. We hope to make maybe a small effort in the fight against the death penalty today. That's actually everything I want to say. And as I said, if you have questions, you can ask afterwards. And I would give the word to Jay.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for giving me this opportunity, and everyone who has been able to organize so that this lecture happens. I'm so grateful for this platform. My name is Jay Mulucha. I'm the executive director of an organization in Uganda called Femme Alliance Uganda. It's an LGBTQ organization in Uganda. And right now I have a presentation. As Rebecca said, the title of the presentation is The Impact of AHA. AHA is the Anti-Homosexuality Act and other criminal punitive laws in Uganda and community-led efforts so far. So if we are very conversant, we know very well that in Uganda, it's not only the Anti-Homosexuality Act that criminalizes the LGBT community. So I started with this picture, the persecution of LGBTQ persons in Uganda. As you can see, the display of the people, these are part of the people in Uganda who were on the streets demonstrating and trying to push the lawmakers to make sure that they pass the Anti-Homosexuality Act. As you can see, some of the placards have homosexuality is as ugly as the devil. So even others had other placards that had bad words, and it has been a very, very challenging time for us. So I'll start with the introduction. LGBTQ persons in Uganda face several legal challenges, discrimination, state persecution, and stigmatization. This is actively encouraged by religious and conservative leaders and politicians. If we see very well that most of the religious leaders and politicians are the most cause of pushing the Anti-Homosexuality Act because of, especially politicians, they have their own agendas. So they always try to push it so hard so that they can please the communities and the country. So that they can go ahead and get votes from them. And then the religious leaders also do it because they feel that the Bible doesn't accept homosexuality. So why accept homosexuals in the country? As you can see, we also had some religious clerics calling for enactment of the Anti-Homosexuality Act. They were on different streets in different parts of the country in Uganda, and they were holding up their placards and demonstrating on the streets, asking the government and the members of parliament to make sure that this law passes. An overview of the laws that affect LGBTQ persons in Uganda. As I had told you earlier, it's not only the Anti-Homosexuality Act that affects the LGBTQ people. It's not the only act in Uganda. There are different acts in the Penal Code Act. The Penal Code Act has provisions under Section 145, 146, 147, and 148 that criminalizes acts of consensual same-sex. Several persons have been subjected or targeted arbitrary arrests under these provisions. So it's not only the Anti-Homosexuality Act, but if you go to the Penal Code of Uganda, all these sections that are listed down also criminalize same-sex in Uganda. The Registration of Persons Act, this does not recognize transgender persons and only allows for change of sex for persons above the age of 18 years. So transgender persons are not recognized and accepted in our country. If they say they allow the change of sex at the age of 18, this means they accept only intersex persons, not transgender persons. And then the Companies Act, this deters reservation and registration of names for organizations which may seem undesirable. Like, for example, we have SMAG was denied reservation and evenly registration for being undesirable. So, like, we come up with organization and we need to register them so that they are legal in the country. But most of the organizations in Uganda that are registered, they are registered under something else which is not LGBT, because the moment they get to know that you're an organization trying to register under the LGBT or to do the work of the LGBT persons in Uganda, they will not register you. They will not accept to register you. So most of the organizations always try to camouflage under different things. In 2022, several 54 organizations were closed for not meeting the regulatory requirements of being NGOs. They did as such and got to know that most of the organizations that were under human rights or doing LGBTQ work, their licenses were revoked and the organizations were closed. Further, specifically for LGBTI organizations, list of 23 LGBT organizations, including Femme Alliance, were issued by the NGO Bureau investigation and risk revocation of operating. Like, for example, there is a report that came out this year, and it was from the NGO Bureau. So they made sure that they cracked down on LGBT organizations, and they came up with a list of most of the LGBT organizations in Uganda that were doing the LGBT work, and they put them on the list, and they started investigations to find out where those organizations are. And Femme Alliance was among those organizations. Unfortunately, we got a lot of threats. It has been a big challenge operating or opening up our offices. So we have been just operating underground. The HIV Control and Prevention Act, this provides for criminalization of willful and intentional transmission of HIV, as well as forced testing for persons suspected for any sexual offenses. So these are some of the provisions of the acts that I'm talking about. The Sexual Offense Act, which further criminalizes consensual same-sex relations. So there is an act, it's called the Sexual Offense Act. Besides the Anti-Homosexuality Act, we have the Sexual Offences Act, and this act criminalizes consensual same-sex relations. And then the Anti-Homosexuality Act 2014, which was annulled by the courts of law, and 2024, which was reintroduced and passed by Parliament and assented to by the President, and currently in force in Uganda. So we have, as you can see, we have acts that are already criminalizing LGBT people. It's not only the Anti-Homosexuality Act. There are many acts that are criminalizing us. This Anti-Homosexuality Act in 2014 was passed into law. And after the community, the LGBT community and some of the partners went to the courts of law and challenged it, and it was annulled. So that is why I even showed you a picture. I displayed a picture of some of the people who had displayed a placard saying that judges, please don't let us down. It's because this law at first was annulled and it was in the courts of law. So this time they are trying to ask the judges in courts of law not to do the same thing that they did in 2014, because it was annulled, and right now they brought it back in 2023. The impacts of the Act in the fight against HIV. We all know that HIV is a very dangerous thing that is happening around the world at the moment, and we are all trying our best to see how we can prevent it. And the provision of the Anti-Homosexuality Act retrogressive in the fight against HIV/AIDS. Like they are preventing the fight against HIV/AIDS, since the provision will increase stigma and violence against LGBTIQ persons. This will certainly push them more into hiding and put them and the general population at more risk of HIV. Now, that is the president of Uganda who was trying to assent to the Anti-Homosexuality Act. That is the time when he was assenting to it. He was signing it into law. And then the overview of the Anti-Homosexuality Act 2023, enacted to protect the traditional heterosexual community. We all know that most of our cultures in Africa, they think about heterosexuals and thinking of reserving about the culture. So, enacted to protect the traditional heterosexual community, the Act has provisions on offences of homosexuality, aggravated homosexuality, attempt to commit homosexuality with a punishment of death for aggravated homosexuality. That is what, Rebecca, you were talking about, the death penalty. We still have it in this law that just passed recently. And so far, we have had one victim, but they haven't yet signed to that. But at least we have one victim who has been told that he's going to be killed. And then protection and assistance of payment of compensation to victims of homosexuality, aiding and abetting homosexuality, procuring homosexuality by threat, promotion of homosexuality by individuals, organizations, media, landlords, among other organizations. Among others, organizations risk revocation of permits and paying of hefty fines. And then there is prohibition of same-sex marriages. All these are in the Anti-Homosexuality Act. These are the sections which they follow to give you a punishment, because we have a death penalty, we have 20 years in prison, we have 10 years in prison, we have 14 years in prison, we have 3 years in prison. So this all depends on what they think you have committed according to what they wrote down. So it's quite a challenging moment for us. The general impact of punitive laws on public health. Punitive laws like the Anti-Homosexuality Act have several consequences on public health. They push individuals further away from accessing essential health and social services that are vital for managing drug dependency, preventing the transmission of HIV, stroke, AIDS, and supporting individuals to full lives. Then criminalization has had a further impact of pushing away people from testing and treatment. It also obstructs health education and outreach that can help and end AIDS as a public health threat. The passage of the Act will also reduce access to prevention as well as treatment services. Right now, as I speak in Uganda, most health service providers have been refused to give us health service provisions. This is because of the act that was passed, and anyone who is found giving health services to an LGBT person, they will revoke the permit of that health center or hospital or clinic. They will revoke the permit, or they will chase that health service provider who was trying to treat that person. So it's quite a challenging time for us to get health services from different places or different hospitals because of this bill. And the continuation, criminalization of consensual same-sex relations dissuade service providers from providing services to LGBTIQ persons. This is what I was talking about, that in case you're a service provider or a health provider and you give services to an LGBTQ persons and they get to know that you're giving them services, you will face the law or you will lose your job. So further, it has the effects of disowning and preventing LGBTIQ persons, especially those that are affected by HIV/AIDS, from engaging professional counseling and accessing HIV-related service provision and health services. And then social impact of criminalization and punitive laws. More than ever before, there is demand from the community leaders and government officials to exclude sexual and gender minority from accessing basic services like health, education, employment, and housing, among others. And this is as a result of the Anti-Homosexuality Act. In other words, the ongoing narrative against sexual and gender minorities has made it sinister for one to either be or associate with LGBTIQ. The Deputy Speaker of Parliament, the Honorable Thomas Tayewa, was on record castigating LGBTIQ, and so is the Deputy Commander Land Forces, Major General Francis Takira, who publicly ordered health workers to stop treating homosexuals in public health facilities, which infringes on the rights to health of LGBTQ persons. So this is what I was talking about. In case you are caught treating or giving health service provisions to members of the LGBTQ community, you are held accountable for that. These are our leaders, the ones that we call our leaders in Uganda, who are publicly announcing that. It's so shaming. So punitive laws have had an impact on infringing upon the basic rights, and several impacts and severely impacts our ability to live freely and authentically. Some of the public rights that have been infringed by the punitive laws in Uganda are freedom from discrimination, right to fair hearing, right to privacy, right to dignity, freedom from cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, freedom of expression, consensual, religion and association, and rights to access to health care services. Many individuals have experienced a loss of employment, evictions, and homelessness. The bill further castigates landlords to push out LGBTIQ plus persons and organizations and individuals out of their premises. Trans being the face of homosexuality in Uganda, transgender people are seen as the key promoters of homosexuality of recruiting of children, among others, into homosexuality, leading to homelessness and lack of safe space to operate or carry out our day-to-day activities. Now, this has happened to a lot of our community members. Most of them have become homeless. They have been sent out of their families. They have been sent out of their workplaces, schools, homes, because of this AHA. The Anti-Homosexuality Act has a clause that if a landlord or the owner of the house is found giving housing to any LGBTQ persons, they will face a penalty of 3 years in prison. So this has made a lot of landlords and families and friends to deny us housing. And this also just happened recently to Femme Alliance, where we were issued a letter of immediate eviction from our office where we were operating because we had an office. It was a premises, and it was serving as an office as well as a shelter for some of the members who have been homeless, who have been pushed out by their families and landlords. So one day back, we were given an eviction letter from the landlord telling us that we don't have to be there and he doesn't want us to be there. So we are all stuck and don't know where to go at the moment because of different members who have been using that premises as a shelter. And we as the staff of Femme Alliance are also puzzled at the moment just because of this Anti-Homosexuality Act. The dire circumstances have forced some LGBTIQ persons to flee the country in search of safety and opportunity to live their lives without fear of persecution. And this is happening a lot because most of the members in our community, they have faced a lot of violence, discrimination, attacks, and a lot of things. So they prefer to leave the country. So they are running away to different countries. And some of them are going to even our neighboring countries, and yet also our neighboring countries are not welcoming. So it's a critical moment at the moment. Due to the restrictions, the law has also increased the cost of living as LGBTIQ persons are warranted to relocate from one place to another for their safety. We have to use private transport as public means poses a risk to our lives and livelihood. This is very true because the moment you are phoned or the landlord gets to know that you're part of the LGBT community, they will throw you out. So this makes us keep on moving, relocating from one place to another, of which we don't know whether where we are relocating is also safe or not safe. Also, if it comes to transportation, like moving from one place to another, it's quite expensive because if you don't use a private car and maybe use a public car, you can be attacked because we have seen many, many attacks in our community in that way. Increased community witch hunting is now the biggest challenge. LGBTIQ persons have to be extremely cautious on who they talk to, who they relate with, where they access basic services from, or worst, what healthcare centers do they visit, especially those whose names and organization were listed in the NGO report. So this report that I was talking about listed some of the organizations that are suspected to be promoting homosexuality. So, and some of us, our names came out in those reports. So it's difficult for us to access different services because we fear that we can be maybe recognized, and they know that we are the leaders of those organizations. So it's quite a challenge. Coupled with the above injustices, LGBTIQ persons are now being rejected from accessing public education institutions because of so-called family values, religious affiliations, and cultural beliefs. Donors are now skeptical in releasing funding to transgender, among other LGBTI organizations, as it's seen as a risk after the passing of the bill. The LGBTIQ community is now facing heightened number of stigma and discrimination, leading to limited accessibility to healthcare services, increased number of hate crimes and hate speeches, high burden on LGBTIQ persons who are on ART, that's antiretroviral drugs, fear in accessing gender-affirming treatment for trans persons due to the fact that on any suspicious that someone is homosexual, they should be reported or arrested. Heightened levels of mental health challenges ranging from depression, anxiety, panic attack to worse situations of suicidal tendencies, increased risk factors and diseases burden. Most members are now struggling with accessing life-saving medication like PrEP and PEP because of fear to go to these health centers to access the services because they know they can easily be recognized and spotted out. Efforts to end HIV/AIDS in Uganda. Although Uganda has demonstrated commitment to ending AIDS, this has been disrupted by the continued enactment of the punitive laws like the AHA. The Uganda AIDS Commission, in its legal assessment for HIV and AIDS in Uganda in 2022, concluded that section of the Penal Code Act, which criminalizes the acting of having carnal knowledge against the order of nature and lack of recognition for transgender persons, among other laws, fuels stigma and discrimination. It further discourages HIV testing and disclosure of test results, disappointedly affecting marginalized groups. Now, these are community-led efforts to avert the impact of criminal and punitive laws. Continued advocacy for the legal recognition of LGBTIQ persons in Uganda. This is continuous because we are not giving up on that. Continued partnership and collaboration with various stakeholders. Continued awareness to the community on the impact of the Act. Strategic litigation, especially on the violation of various rights, inconstitutionality of various laws like the Anti-Homosexuality Acts of 2014 and 2023, then international lobbying. So in other words, we are doing this continuously to see that we achieve something out of it. Because at the moment, as I speak, we have a team of LGBTQ people and partners and different entities that came together, and they have gone to the courts of law to challenge the AHA. So we hope we shall get better results out of it. So the community is still doing its best to see that they annul this act. So the conclusion, LGBTQ persons are human beings deserving of the same rights. Criminalization and punitive laws push us further to the margins and entrench stigma, discrimination, and violence. It further dilutes all the gains that have been advanced in the fight against HIV in Uganda, because we know very well that if one community is discriminated and stigmatized and denied getting health service provisions, then we shall not achieve our goals of fighting the HIV. All voices should rise up to condemn the criminalization and call for discrimination and repeal of such draconian laws that have a great impact on public health. Solidarity and strength, please stand with Uganda. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jay, for these insights. So now there would be time for questions. If you have a question, you can just type it in the public chat, or you can just unmute yourself. I'm not sure if everybody is able to unmute themselves, actually. So maybe just type it in the chat, and then Jay can answer your questions.
Enjoying this episode? Leave a review now.
Hear my true story.
And because these questions were asked online through typing messages, I will be able to read some of these questions, and perhaps for the listeners can understand what was the exact question that Jay answered.
With you every week. Hear my true story.
Is there a possibility to save the person's life who is currently facing the death penalty?
There is a possibility if one, because we have tried to engage different lawyers to see that the fact that the AHA is being petitioned in the courts of law, so that they should hold on to implement it. Because right now we are waiting for the courts of law to see the next step. So the fact that it's still in the courts of law, we are trying to see that the lawyers ask the government not to continue with the implementation of the law until we hear from the courts of law. So that's the only thing that we have at the moment. Other than that, if the government refuses, then there is no option.
Well, there's another question that was asked. I mean, how are you doing your work right now in Uganda after passing the Anti-Homosexuality Act? And how are you being able to manage in this kind of atmosphere?
Okay, if I have gotten the question right, is how the way we are doing our work right now, it's very tense, but we are still doing underground work to make sure that we serve our communities in all ways possible, because we cannot just give up and leave it at that. We are continuing with our advocacy and doing the same work, though we are doing it when we are security cautious about what is going to happen next. So it's not easy the way it was. It has never been easy, but this time it's more difficult than it was. But we continue to work and serve our communities, because there are a lot of needs in our community at the moment. And if we just give up, then it will be hell for the LGBTQ community. I don't know if I've answered your question right.
Another question that was asked is that the participants or maybe the audience wanted to know, how could they definitely help when they are not in Uganda?
First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank most of my friends. Alex is here. He's one of the person who have ever visited our organization, and he's in Germany right now, if I'm not mistaken. He has come to our offices and engaged with some of our members, and he was so disappointed when he heard that we were evicted from our office, because he has visited it and engaged with some of our members. And I would like to thank him for the contribution he has made towards supporting us in various ways. And also other different people from Germany who have been standing with us, supporting us financially. Because as I told you, our organization, we have a shelter where we have around 25 members. And actually, every day the number increases, because we get new cases of people who are homeless in our community. So we have got some support from some of the people in Germany who have been supporting us financially to see that we sustain ourselves when it comes to food, paying rent for the shelter, getting clothes for the members, getting some health services. And there are some of our members, like 4 of them who were raped, collective rape. I don't know if you get that if I say collective rape, like trying to rape someone to make them straight. So that financial support has been channeled to supporting us in such areas. Also, people who have been attacked and beaten, those who have been taken to cells. So we thank you so much, all those people who have stood with us. And in case you would like to support us, I can share. I don't know if Otako is online here. Maybe because I gave him my details. He can share. Maybe if you don't mind, Otako, please, can you share this here for some people to get the details, the organization bank account, or you can use Western Union to send us something to support us in all ways. And Otako is one of the people who introduced me to one of the podcasts that introduced me to many of you. So I thank you so much, Otako. Yeah, you can share them now. You can put them in the here in the messages so that people can get them. Yeah, that is one of the ways that you can support us, because right now as I speak, we are really in need. We need to evict from the premises where they have sent us out and get another place, because we have members who are using that space as a shelter. So we need to get another location where we can put our members and continue operating the offices. Rebecca, did you hear that well? Can you help me with the question again?
Yeah, the question was if it could be also interpreted as a anti-colonial fight, because many of these laws are rooted in old colonial laws. I think that was the question, right?
So, right, yeah. At the moment, we have been trying to talk to our government that because colonial laws are still operative in African countries, and yet the people who introduced them already changed. So that is a big challenge that we are facing, trying to see that our countries change these laws, because the people who introduced them no longer use them. Why are we still using the same laws? And that's the question that we have been trying to ask our governments and policymakers and lawmakers. But still, as you know, Africans, it's kind of hard.
So, within the participants or within the audience, there was one question that a person wanted to know: what is the role of the international community? I mean, what is the role of the international organizations? What can they do in the fight against this anti-homosexuality act that was passed in Uganda?
Yeah, we have tried to get support as a community from international entities like the US Mission and other entities. They have been trying to engage our president privately because they don't want to come out publicly. Once they come out publicly, the Ugandan community will say that they are influencing or they are trying to push their agenda and force their culture to Africans. So that's why they are trying to help, but at a low profile, privately. They are trying to engage the president and different government officials and parliamentarians and talking to them in different ways. Yes, they are helping us. They are trying their best, but as you know, most of these leaders just think about staying in power. So they do what the community wants, what the Ugandan community wants. That's all they think about. And they have different governments have also supported us in challenging this law in court by making sure we have lawyers and different partners. So they are supporting us also in that area.
So thank you very much, Jay, for being here today.
Thank you to all of you who have created time to come and listen to me. And thank you for giving me this platform. Thank you to everyone who is standing with us. And we still need your help and support in any way, in all ways. Please, as I said, stand with Uganda. I'm so grateful to have shared this. Thank you so much.
And my dear listeners, I want to just say a full applause to the organizers of this lecture. Thank you so much for always organizing such opportunities for people to share their own stories. We say thank you. And Jay, I want to thank you for also definitely allowing me to share this lecture on this podcast for my dear listeners. And for that reason, I want to say thank you for also telling your story in your lecture. Well, my dear listeners, thank you so much for listening to Hear My True Story podcast and for always following us on all the podcasting streaming platforms. That was the lecture done by Jay. And for those who want to support the organization of Jay in Uganda, we have the details in the description of this episode. You can go down to the descriptions and you'll see how to support the LGBTIQ community in Uganda. As you heard it in the episode, it is not that easy, but anything that you do, any simple support that you have, it is really important for the community in Uganda. And for those who are really happy that they listened and they learned a lot about this wonderful episode, how it is for LGBTIQ plus people in Uganda, you can share this wonderful episode to your networks. You can tell them about it. You can also share the podcast to other people so they can also really listen to these wonderful conversation stories that are shared by people based on their real life experiences. It has been me, Otako, your host, and I'm always happy to be with you every week. And I would like to say bye for now.
We not only have voices for a podcast, but also faces for YouTube. Don't miss your next episode. Hear my true story.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Music by Edwin Matovo, hosted and produced by Otako. Subscribe to our podcast for more stories and visit us on our website, hearmytruestory.com, for more stories. All the links are listed in the show notes of this podcast.